Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more vibrant second half. If you find yourself on YouTube today, don't forget to ring that bell so you don't miss any more of these conversations. If you're on a podcast platform, please remember to subscribe and share this podcast so more women are in on this conversation. Today, we are going to be talking about menopause. My guest wants women to discuss the nuances of their individual experiences, to challenge the widely held social constructs, and give rise to empowering new perspectives on the menopause paradigm. My guest is Alexandra Stockwell. She's the intimacy doctor, the intimate marriage expert, and she's a co-author with Trisha Brooke of the new book, The Invitation: Vital Conversations About Menopause. Alexandra, thank you so much for being on the show today.
I'm very glad to be here. I really enjoy speaking with you, and I'm so excited about our topic.
Wonderful. Why don't you give us a little bit of insight about why this topic and why now?
You know, there's a way in which the topic of menopause is starting to become popular, if you will. Obviously, for as long as women have lived long enough to experience it, menopause is something that's been happening, but it was kind of in a bit of a black box and not something that was discussed. I think of it a little bit like I've read historical novels, and actually I have met some women when practicing medicine who just never were told anything about menstruation. And so when they started bleeding, they thought they were dying because, you know, they're bleeding from the inside. What's going on? And the lack of understanding, expectation of the wide range of normal when we start to menstruate, we all know how important that is. And generally speaking, in our culture, we make sure that our girls know to expect that. But when it comes to menopause, how often have we had a conversation with our mother about that phase of life and about her symptoms, her feelings, challenges, anything that got easier, anything that became more difficult? And we're missing this dialogue in our culture. And so having myself not really ever put that much attention on menopause in my life personally, my mother died just after her 60th birthday when I was in my 30s, and I never thought to ask her about her experience. I anticipated her death and had an opportunity to ask so many different questions, but it just never came to my mind to ask her about her menopause experience. So I don't know what that's like. I don't know what my matriarchal legacy is in that regard. And my friend Trisha Brooke, who actually her expertise is in helping people find their voice and changing the world and making a contribution through what is said, she reached out to me and said, you know, this is a topic people aren't speaking about, and I'd like to write a book with you. And we ended up having a dialogue. The book itself is our dialogue, and I'm excited to share some of what opened up as a result of just having these conversations, not talking with your doctor and treating it as a problem that needs a solution, although that also is extremely important, and not just ignoring it if it's not causing trouble, but really honoring it as this milestone that every woman is going to go through at some point if she lives long enough to do so.
And we are seeing more women going through it earlier and earlier as well.
Yes, exactly. As a result of just unknown causes of early menopause, as a result of any kind of medical treatment or cancer or something that necessitates it. So all of those situations are unusual, but bringing the conversation back to women who have what I'll just call a more traditional journey, this is something that impacts us profoundly, and we're not really talking about it. And it's great to learn from our doctors, although what they have to offer is highly varied in terms of how valuable it is.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to be learning from one another the same way we learn from one another about parenting, about all of our various life choices, what it's like going through menopause and how big the range is something that is empowering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And normalizing the conversation is important because, like you said, this is throughout history to be expected. I had a conversation with a naturopath, and she put it this way: you know, menopause is puberty in reverse. At some point, we did not have a cycle and we moved into a cycle. And menopause is just that in reverse. So now we're going from a cycle to not having a cycle. But so many women, that equals vitality for them. There's something about being, if you will, fertile, able to have
Yes.
children. There's a season of life that feels fruitful in that way, that is attached to youthfulness. I feel like it's one of those paradigms. Did you guys have a conversation around that specific paradigm?
Yes, and actually, the language reflects that. In this moment, I don't recall exactly what the meaning of puberty is, but if you look up the meaning, it has to do with what you're moving towards. It has to do with the what's becoming possible. And menopause literally means the cessation of menses. There's nothing forward looking in that term. There's nothing about what's now ahead, about the new possibility and the kind of fertility in other areas of life. It's just defined by no longer menstruating. And menopause is so much richer as a transition. But yes, exactly what you said. And that's also, it's reflected in a lot of different ways. Um, there's some data showing that approximately 50 to 51% of women over the age of 50 are no longer sexually active. I really think that that statistic does not need to be the reality for so many people. And there are a lot of ways to really change that and allow vitality and pleasure and enjoying one's body. And one of those is essentially to reclaim menopause, not to think of it as a kind of um, like the ending of what was good, but
Mm-hmm.
more the transition into something meaningful. And, there's so many ways in which this is a gap in our societal attitudes and paradigm. Another way that we see this is if you think of the archetypes, right? There's the maiden, the young girl, we celebrate that, the mother, we celebrate that. And sometimes we celebrate, sometimes we don't. The crone, but the crone really is the older wise woman. I'm 54. I don't identify as a crone. Like there should be four different archetypes. We're missing that middle one that comes. I mean, of course, I'll continue to be a mother as long as I live, but in terms of mothering and being fertile and having babies and nursing, and that whole phase has passed for me. But it's like there's a gap in the feminine archetypes
Mm.
before getting to crone, which I don't have a particular age that I associate with being a crone, but I definitely think of that as being an older woman, an old woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think there was a time in history when there wasn't this gap. I think the longevity that we face now, this gift of more time, if you will, we have potentially somewhere between 25 and 30 years more than generations before us. Think 50 to 100 years ago. So I think they jumped to crone because it was literally the closer to the life expectancy. And I think you're right about needing that. We need the third one to move to 4 and then throw something else in.
Yes, yes, exactly. And um I think part of bringing in that third archetype, whatever it might be, I don't have a suggested name, I just am aware of the gap. But I think through conversations like the one that Trisha and I had, which is the book, and the one that you and I are having, and the ones that we could all be having really with any women at this time of life or anticipating it, perhaps then what that archetype is will arise. But I think one of the elements of this missing archetype, if you will, is that we don't have an appreciation for how wide the range is of individual women's experiences.
Mm.
In our book, so Trisha and I shared our experiences, and then we also interviewed 4 other women. And Trisha herself has had hot flashes and night sweats and not used any medication to manage it, and is vibrant and so enthusiastic about life. I myself have not actually had any symptoms at all. My memory is definitely, I used to have an impeccable memory and I don't anymore. I don't know if that's just aging or that's menopause. I don't know, but I don't actually have any symptoms. I don't, if I went by my own experience only, I wouldn't even need a word to describe what's going on. And we also spoke with 3 women who have been through such challenging times, feeling betrayed by the medical system. I think that that is, I don't know if it's more common, but it is the voice that's heard the loudest in our society, and people who find it vitalizing or freeing or just very straightforward, we're not often representing our experience. And what's really interesting is the other person that we interviewed, her expertise is menopause in the workplace. Is that anything you've ever heard about?
You know what? I have gotten some conversation opportunities around that because, to your point with the memory, of course, I've had some fantastic opportunities to talk to different people about menopause. And some of them, they're menopause experts, naturopath, integrative doctors, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because we have a lot more symptoms than they talk about in the medical world. Like what we hear, the hot flashes, the night sweats, and the memory, those would be like your quote normal, right? But if you think about it and you talk to enough women, there is a list of symptoms. And when you talk to a menopause expert, there's a list, and it begins to bring to your mind this idea that depending on the life we've lived, the amount of stress we've endured, how well we eat, how well we sleep, how well we manage our thought life, all of these things, mind, body, spirit, come to us at this point in life when we go through menopause, and it impacts our experience. And memory is one of those ones that's scary, and it's interesting because that particular one is pretty common. There's just a fogginess or like a short-term memory loss that goes on. And so I think a lot of women in the workplace, to your question, I have not had that conversation because I'm not typically a workplace conversation podcast. But to answer your question, a lot of women, the topic that comes up are their jobs are being impacted because the workplace as a whole doesn't know what to do with women who are going through that. And it does affect how we think, how we feel, our energy, all of those things. I think menopause is, I don't know what the right word is, but I've been thinking about that third archetype, and I'm like, how about mover and shaker? We'll go from maiden mom to mover and shaker to crone. Because I feel like this, you mentioned the word vibrancy when we were talking earlier, and this really is potentially one of the most productive and vibrant seasons of our life. And menopause is kind of like a portal to that new season. And that's how I see it. What did you guys come to in these conversations?
I've been inspired by Christiana Northrup, who said years ago, that menopause is like a second adolescence. And so for 20 years, I've had that in the back of my mind and brought that out when I realized, oh, like there's a new kind of fun to be had. And I wasn't that rebellious for various reasons in my teen years. And not that I am rebellious, but there's a kind of a, who cares what people think if this is what I feel drawn to do? So that energy is definitely available. But what we found through our conversation with one another and then also with the other women we interviewed, that what menopause means has a lot to do with how we relate to ourselves in the first place. So for those of us who've had an invigorating, an inspiring, a fascinating, and a relatively easy journey with perimenopause and menopause, we have tended, this is not a case controlled double blind. This is based on conversation with a handful of women, that those of us who related to ourselves, to our bodies and our lives in that way, that was reflected in menopause. It's like menopause dialed up the qualities in our relationship to our bodies. And the three women that we interviewed who really suffered, and I wouldn't want anything I'm saying to be misconstrued as blaming them for their symptoms. I want to be very, very careful. But there's a way in which before coming to perimenopause, before having any symptoms, they were very oriented, all three of them, to controlling their bodies, to making it obey, all kinds of self images that were not complementary. And there's a way in which all of that was intensified in menopause. I'm not drawing any grand conclusions other than to say, to the extent that we can nurture our relationship with ourselves, to trust and align and honor, get enough rest, eat well, but also the thoughts we have in our head, make them as nice as you would be talking about your friend. Are you being your own kindest friend and advocate in your own head? That was something that really emerged, that if you're feeling less than and just kind of wanting to control, to look like you're 25 again, that is not the best setup for dancing through menopause. But reconnecting with passions. In fact, for me personally, one of the things that has happened is I used to love horseback riding, and I stopped riding when I was about 13. There were some emotional complications in my family, and one of the fallouts of that was that I was no longer riding horses. And 40 years later, I started riding again, and I can only attribute it to something awakening in me going through menopause in this way. But I also want to say, unlike the other guests you've had on the show, and unlike how I approach other topics with expertise, I really don't mean to come as an expertise on menopause. I really mean to open the conversation. The name of our book is The Invitation, Vital Conversations About Menopause. My hope for anyone listening is not that I say something and it's really, the words of an expert. No, my hope is that anyone listening starts having conversations with your mother, with your daughters, with your friends, with whomever you might be talking with. Share your own experience, ask questions to hear theirs. This is really about dialogue and raising awareness and finding companionship, because another element of menopause for so many people is that it's incredibly isolating. Anyone who has a partner, chances are, even if they're kind, they're not in the same body. They know how to be kind, but they don't necessarily get it. Although that also is something that can be done with more and less grace.
Mm-hmm. And I'm finding, at least in my marriage, that my husband's body has been going through a lot because of stress and things. So, you hear that term menopause.
Yes, yes, yes.
But I think it's a thing. And so, in general, discussing what we're feeling and how we're going through things and not being embarrassed and ashamed about it, I think is a great idea, because it is different, right? We are going from one season of life to another, and there's a definite transition. And the transition for some people, to your point, is easy. And some people, it's very difficult. And then there's the whole gamut in between. So I feel like if we could not just talk about the symptoms, which I think has been the general menopause focus in the world outside, if you will, and really think about, I would like to have more conversations around, to your point, this whole like curiosity around what this season can mean and who I'm becoming, and how I have an opportunity to see myself differently as well.
Yes, I love what you're saying. This is exactly it, because I think one of the reasons we talk about symptoms a lot is it's a multi-billion-dollar industry to treat those symptoms. But what you're talking about now, which is the thing that excites me too, like asking, what do you feel like you're giving up as you transition into menopause? And what do you feel like is newly available? These are the kinds of questions that, in general, women are not asking one another. But whatever the answer is, we get to be more inspired, become more self-aware. What are you losing? Is there a way in which you look in the mirror and you see something different now that you're not menstruating, even though maybe your figure is exactly the same as it was a year or two ago, and maybe it's different. But what does that difference mean to you in connection with menopause? What are you going to do with the the time and attention that's opened up because you're not monitoring your menstrual cycle? What new interests arise, or what has you feeling shut down in this phase? What contribution do you want to make when your fertility, in terms of physiology, is no longer active? Like, how do you want to be fertile going forward? Like, what other arenas do you want to become fertile in? These are the questions that bring sisterhood and compassion, inspiration.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking, if we could turn our attention to honoring this journey as a gift, I think menopause can easily be seen as kind of this horrible thing. There's a lot of that negative, attitude around it. And while it can be difficult for women, I think I've been beating the drum of midlife potential and it being this incredible opportunity. So this is just another piece of that conversation where you're right. We've been thinking about, our fertility equaling something, right? This equals something valuable. So if that gets taken away, am I still valuable? Feels like the undercurrent, the conversation that's not being had, but kind of feels, and maybe not everyone feels this way, but there's definitely this feeling of your youth and your menstrual cycle are like they're married to each other. And once that menstrual cycle goes, somehow we become invisible. I've had other people share this with me. And this is an interesting concept, because if we live from 18 to 48, 30 years, right? We live 48 to 78. It's another 30 years. A lot of people are going through menopause around 48. You could potentially have 25 very fertile years in other ways where the menstrual cycle was never meant to define us. It was just a function of our body for a season of our lives for a purpose. And now we get to have another way of fertility, is what I hear you saying.
Yes, and the way to access that and make that the normal way in our society is to have conversations. It's to acknowledge what's happening and to share our thoughts and feelings, our fears, our aspirations. It's through dialogue and attention that what you've described gets to actually become the reality. Another thing I was thinking about while you were speaking is how, when a baby's born, we're so excited, we celebrate the birthdays, and in anticipating a birth, there are baby showers or various kinds of rituals depending on your community. But essentially, the baby shower acknowledges this milestone to come. And same thing, we have wedding showers. And anyway, I just was thinking, like, what if we had like some kind of a menopause ritual? I don't think that most women listening would necessarily think, oh, that sounds great. I don't think that. Maybe it's a more private ritual that you do with yourself. I don't really know. I don't have the answers, and I'm not intending to have the answers. I'm really wanting to bring the questions and inspire dialogue. And actually, in our book, The Invitation, Vital Conversations About Menopause, each chapter is a different topic where, again, we don't have answers. We mostly have questions and our own experience and an opening of the dialogue about relationships between women, what it is to be a menopausal woman in the workplace. We spoke with Pat Duckworth, who is an expert in that in the UK, and I learned so much from her. Apparently in the UK, businesses were losing women of a older than 50, and they've made some changes because women are, at that point, they're trained, they're competent, they're reliable. And so in the UK, there are laws passed, and if you want a fan on your desk, you can just request it. But to the point you made earlier, they're not just issued to all women over 50 because our individual experiences vary greatly. And anyway, I think one of the most interesting things in the book is really hearing the different solutions and the ways that they've navigated that for women who don't have to retire, who don't then have to somehow suffer like people in retail who are only allowed to take a break every so often, but their bladders are no longer able to wait that long. They don't have to quit their job. There are accommodations being made with grace and elegance. It's very profound to read what she shared. But in any case, just having those conversations allows us to embrace ourselves and one another more fully. Oh, but I lost my train of thought. Here I am modeling exactly what I'm talking about. What I wanted to say is that we have a chapter on menopause in the workplace, a chapter on the relationships between women and the sisterhood, a chapter on sex and marriage in the context of menopause. Like, we cover a lot of our self-identity. We cover a lot of different areas, all of which are very relevant in becoming more authentic, more empowered, more self-expressed, more connected, and ultimately better able to serve humanity when we are actually more free to do that in the menopausal years.
Yes. I think the idea of freedom is one that we could have a little discussion around, right? Seeing it as a gateway instead of a shut door. Do you know what I mean? A passage.
Yes, I do. But I think for the woman who her identity is hugely wrapped up in birthing and parenting, this is not an easy transition to really connect with her value when that's not going to happen anymore. But having these conversations is the way to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. It is an interesting conversation around our body image and what we value in terms of youthfulness and accepting maybe our bodies. Like my body has just been a complete kind of stranger through this journey. Part of it has to do with different situations within our lives that have added extra stress that I needed to take on. And that cortisol in your body through perimenopause is another layer of your body not having the same capacity because it's working hard to make a transition. And then you pile life on top of it. And I think that's an important conversation too, is this idea of graciousness, having grace for ourselves and other women, and understanding that, earlier I talked about that menopause is puberty in reverse, but usually at 12 to 14, whenever we, let's say, average start our cycles, our life hasn't been long enough to build up a dossier of stress and pressure on our organs and our parasympathetic nervous system and all of that. Menopause, when we get to this point, yes, it's puberty in reverse, but it's puberty in reverse after however many years, 40, 45 years of living. So it is a more gracious process because our bodies have been through so much. So it's like, I look at it like a partnership. It's like learning to listen to my body, honoring where it's at, accepting where it's at, and questioning, is it really important to look 25 forever? Because I feel like that undercurrent is another undercurrent, right? Because I keep seeing these ads and they're like, I'm 63 and I look 25 or whatever. And I'm like, that's great. But did we sign a contract at some point that said we would never age, or that aging is maturing in your body and your face and in your experiences is somehow a negative thing? And it kind of irks me because I think it's still in the back of my mind. And you see so much of it still now. So they're marketing to us perimenopausal and menopausal women, but they're still pushing the youth and beauty as the goal.
Right. I completely agree with you. And like the way that I would say the exact same thing is that instead of creating an authentic third archetype, which reflects the juiciness and the spunk and the experience and how to navigate disappointments in our life, instead of that being conveyed in the archetype, what's offered in the advertising is essentially a version of maiden menopause. And that's not actually the way. Maiden menopause is not what comes after mothering and on the way to crone. That is a total detour that we're suckers for as a society. And I really resonated when you said, that your body can feel like a stranger, but needs to become your BFF again. You need to we all need to find our way back to an aligned relationship with our body, because fundamentally, if we are, you didn't use this language, but some of the women we interviewed did, basically being at war with their bodies, like their bodies are doing one thing and they want to do something else, and they are not going in the same direction. That being at war with your body undermines how good life can be. I mean, just very basically. And in many ways, the menopause journey is allowing our relationship with our body to evolve. And in fact, You know, we're used to growth and evolution. We count on it in many different areas of life. We count on it with our finances, that at 50 we'll have more money than at 25. We count on it in terms of professional expertise. We expect to be promoted or doing just doing things we love, being paid for it, whatever it is. In terms of our house, until we choose to downsize, we expect if we're going to move to go to bigger and better. We just expect growth and evolution in some important areas of our life. But somehow we don't really expect growth and evolution in relationship to our body. And so, if nothing else, menopause is an invitation to find our own way forward with growth and evolution in relationship to our body, which cannot be stuck in time.
Mm-hmm. It's an opportunity to get to know ourselves in a new and different way.
It is. And one of the best ways to get to know ourselves in a new and different way is through conversation with other women, where we can learn from what they say, we can answer questions we didn't know we had, we can articulate our own experience in a way that helps us identify what it is. That conversation, whether it's at the water cooler or taking a walk in the park in the morning or on social media or in a church group or wherever it is, that conversation is really the healing mode, is really the reclamation, the transformation that we all need around menopause most of all.
Mm-hmm. There's an empowerment to that, because instead of being told what menopause is and how we should feel and how we should look and what it should do, instead of receiving the instructions, if you will.
Yes, all the shoulds.
Yes. I think the beauty of it is a shedding. It's your cycle is ending, but you can shed with that cycle all of those expectations or all of those paradigms. You can let them go together, if you will, because the expectations can change, because our bodies are different. We are in a different season, and that can be such a powerful and exciting thing, to an adventure. I see it as an adventure.
I love when you talk about this. I've thought of this a few times during the conversation, because what I'm saying is so necessary, is exactly what you do with this podcast and clearly how you approach your life, to be acknowledging the potential that this is not, I mean, we have some idea that we kind of peak at 35 or certainly peak at 50, and then at whatever pace it is, it's downhill after that. And the reality is that so many things open up for us when we have attention and energy newly available, but we need the courage to actually see it that way, have the conversations, listen to your podcast, be inspired, and pay it forward to others. In fact, there's one woman in the book that we spoke with who really was suffering with, she's a flight attendant, so she was used to having weird cycles in various ways, but she always had energy and memory and integrity and following through in what she was doing, and she just felt so lost when menopause started, when she didn't realize it was menopause. She panicked. She didn't know what it was. Like we were saying earlier, you just, and you get worried it's something else. When I had my memory start to wane, I was like, am I having micro strokes all the time, mini strokes all the time? I mean, I suppose it's possible I am, but it's also possible it's just the result of the hormones. Anyway, she had a client who recognized what was going on, had been through it herself, and said, I think this is menopausal, and I have a holistic doctor who helped me so much. You should talk to her. And having been to multiple different doctors before that, she went to this holistic doctor, and that was the beginning of her brain fog clearing and her energy increasing and being able to follow through on her commitments. Anyway, she now unequivocally, whenever she's talking to a woman where she has the sense that this may be relevant, whereas before she might have kept quiet, been polite, been discreet, not wanting to kind of cross the boundary because we don't talk about these things, she now speaks up and says, hey, I had this going on and I wanted to tell you in case you're interested. I'm happy to share what worked for me. That there's a way in which it's not, when people are pregnant, they just start telling pregnancy stories without permission. We need to have not quite that level of presumed freedom to tell, our horror stories in pregnancy to newly pregnant women. No, I'm not a fan of that. But there's some modified version where sharing our menopause experience, the solutions, when it was easy, when it was hard, how we accommodated, these are the conversations that we really need to be having to empower all of us, and also for men to learn how to be helpful in a way that they don't really have a chance of being unless we can include this in the conversation with them too.
There's just it's such a different way of approaching life because things slow down in a different way. Does that make sense? Like, it's not that life slows down and it's all downhill from here. It just takes such a different focus for so many women. I have a woman that I had interviewed, gosh, I lose track of time. I would say last year, possibly. And her name is Deirdre Wolnick. And she's 72. And she just got back from her second run in Europe. She was in Spain this time. And she has taken up rock climbing, like real rocks, outdoors in her 70s. She started in her late 60s. Her son happens to be a famous free climber. And she's now gone for a month. This is the second time in the last 12 months she's done this. She's over in other countries talking to climbers about climbing and climbing famous, rocks and faces at 72.
It's incredible. And does that mean we should all take up rock climbing in our 60s? No, it doesn't. But does it mean that we need to be exposed to these ideas to discover our own passions, our own pursuits? One of the studies that I talk about in the book, I remember this so clearly from medical school. There were two groups of senior citizens. I don't remember exactly how old they were. Let's just say they were in their 70s. And 70s and 80s, and they were each shown different, well, first their measurements were taken in terms of blood pressure and posture and how quickly they moved and the quality of their gait, if they were walking robustly or shuffling or whatever. And then half of them were shown a 5-minute clip about aging with lots of negative implications, making it seem like aging is just a downer. And the other group was shown a clip about aging, which was inspiring, with stories like this woman, Deirdre Wolnick, and the other women who are doing men and women who are doing such amazing things in the last decades of their life. And the group that watched the encouraging one, all of their metrics improved. They walked faster, their memory tests, they did better, their posture was more upright. They were so directly influenced by that message. And the other group, of course, it was the opposite. There was more shuffling, they were all slower, just from a 5-minute clip. The interesting thing to me is that then the groups were swapped and they watched the other one, and it had the same impact. The ones watching the downer video, they didn't maintain their excellent results. They were lower, and the ones who were slower and just not as strong on the memory tests, they improved their scores watching this clip. And so I'm sharing this because hearing about this woman, that it's not just a curiosity, it's that literally inspires us. It changes our physiology, it affects our unconscious mind and makes more things possible. And it is not about becoming a rock climber, but it is about that thing that you'd love to do, believing that actually you can go for it, whether it's grand or it's just baking a cake this afternoon rather than watching TV instead. I guess you could do both. I don't know if that was the best example, but the point is that we need to be exposed to people with passion and vibrancy and real concerns as well. And the way to do that is through opening up our dialogues, both with whom we're speaking with and the topics we're discussing. So instead of if you're, I don't know, 70 years old and you're listening, instead of when you talk with your friend talking about the children and the grandchildren and what they're accomplishing, to also be talking about what you want to accomplish and the steps you're going to take to do so.
I 100% agree with that. And if you had to give 3 kind of encouragements or takeaways for my audience today, Alexandra, what would those 3 things be?
The first one would be to think about your thoughts about menopause, whether you're anticipating it, you're in the middle of it, or you're on the other side. What are your thoughts and assumptions about menopause? That's one. Another would be have a conversation with someone about your experience and their experience. Just ask. And I'm going to give 4. The third is think if there's someone in your life who could benefit from having such a conversation who's not yet in menopause, your daughter or any younger person that you might want to share something encouraging to help them anticipate this time. And then the 4th one, which is probably the most fun, is there anything you want to be doing that you're not doing now? What is it? And what are the steps you could take towards making it happen?
Yes, absolutely. Now, Alexandra, how can people find you and your book?
Well, as you know, the book is out. I'm so excited. It's available on Amazon and a few other places. But do come find us. And we want to hear your story too. We want to hear your observations, and certainly read the book because it will stimulate you to think about your own life in new ways and inspire you to ask questions and share with others. So be sure to get a copy of The Invitation, Vital Conversations About Menopause by Tricia Brook and myself, Alexandra Stockwell.
Fantastic. Well, Alexandra, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and for forwarding this conversation in our culture for our women, because I think it's really important that we change our paradigm around this idea of what menopause is, what it means for our future. I think it's very empowering. I'm grateful that you and Tricia had actually put this together and that you're going out there and banging on this particular drum because it's such an important and pivotal part of our lives as women. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful.
My pleasure. Today, friends, if you find us on YouTube, just look down below. The links will be right there for you. And if you happen to be driving, head to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 337, and the links will be there as well. Friends, we are building a community, one woman to one woman at a time, to talk about the things that are important to us and that maybe haven't become commonplace yet. But menopause is a natural transition that our bodies go through. Some people, it happens surgically. Some people, it happens naturally. But either way, women go through a change in their bodies that require us to take the time to honor it, acknowledge it, figure out how to navigate it, and experience it in a way that when we come out the other side, we are wiser, more vibrant, and we are not at the end of something, but we are at the beginning of the next season of our life. And these conversations that Alexandra wants everyone to have are a vital part of us changing the paradigm in the culture around us, around menopause and what it means for us. I hope that this inspires you. I encourage you to grab a copy of this book, maybe get a book club together, talk to your friends about these things. Why not have these conversations and be more open to what menopause is and what it can mean to us? Instead of being told what it should mean to us, why don't we lead the conversation? And this is one way we can make that happen. Thank you so much for being with us today. I look forward to sharing more inspirational conversations, people, and messages with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.